Columbus, once celebrated for discovering the New World, was responsible for brutal atrocities, including the enslavement and massacre of millions of Native Americans. His quest for gold led to widespread suffering and the near destruction of entire civilizations. By the end of his life, Columbus had lost his titles, was imprisoned, and died in disgrace, with his legacy now marred by the horrors he inflicted. Columbus and his companions treated the natives in the New World so cruelly that one Spanish writer said that he shuddered while writing about this oppression. Columbus's force killed 8 million people on just one island. 8 million people, those who lived for thousands of years in a world of love and peace. The Native Americans, how they saw such bad days. How did Columbus become a villain instead of a hero? How did his last days go? We will show you all this and much more. Legend has it that at a feast someone asked Columbus what landmark you achieved by discovering the route to Asia. Anyone else would have done it if you hadn't. Columbus sent for eggs and asked the audience to make them stand upright. People tried hard but failed as eggs rolled in one direction or the other. Columbus picked up an egg, hit it on the table and cracked it a little. After that, Columbus easily placed it upright on the table. Thus, Columbus conveyed to the audience that an accomplished task looks easy for others to do, but the real credit for success goes to the one who did it first. This incident may be a legend or a fictitious story, but Columbus once again impressed the Spanish rulers. He demanded from the rulers that a large force be sent with him to the New World or the New Asia to enable him to bring gold from the territories he discovered so that it could be deposited in Spain with the king and queen. He also lured the Spanish government with slaves, saying they would prove very good slaves in Spain. The rulers of Spain were so impressed by what Columbus said that they gave him a fleet of 17 ships. 1,300 crewmen and a group of soldiers were included in these ships. The soldiers had swords, guns, and a large amount of weapons. They also had trained bloodthirsty dogs. All this increased the force of Columbus compared to the previous voyage. On the first trip, he only had 90 people with him, while this time, around 2,000 forces were with him. This force could easily crush the entire population of Hispaniola. Columbus took the fleet to Hispaniola at full pace, but he was shocked when he landed on the shore. The 49 men that Columbus had left behind at Fort Navidad had been killed. After Columbus had left for Spain, these people would roam around in search of gold. They would abduct women and children to keep them for sexual abuse, rape, and to put them into forced labor. As a result, the locals ultimately lost patience, so they stormed and killed the Europeans and set the fort on fire. When Columbus saw the fate of his companions, he lost his temper. He ordered his soldiers to search for gold and enslave the local. So these people spread in Hispaniola and started looting the villages. But by then it had become known in Hispaniola that the strangers were not good people and had come to enslave them and steal gold. The Native Americans could not fight the Spanish force, so most of them quit their villages. As such, the Spanish found most of the villages and the houses empty. Besides not finding the people, the Spanish searched the villages for gold but found no inkling of it. In 1495, when Columbus had been in the West Indies for nearly 3 years, he became worried about his back-to-back failures. Gold was not in hand, so he decided to make up for the lack of gold with slaves. So in 1495, he gathered all his forces and raided various villages to enslave the people of Hispaniola. 1,500 men, women, and children were captured in this drive and they were chained like animals, beaten, and huddled in cattle sheds. Soldiers and dogs were deployed to keep them safe. 500 healthier and stronger slaves were sent to Spain. About 200 of these slaves, Native Americans, died of various diseases during the journey. Those who survived and reached Spain were sold in the markets. But even these Native Americans could not bear the climate of Europe. Because they did not grow up here for centuries or thousands of years, they all died one by one. Columbus thought it useless to enslave the natives and send them to Europe. Therefore he had to find gold anyway. So he began to put the locals into bonded labor. In Haiti, Columbus ordered all men 14 years of age or older to find a certain amount of gold every 3 months. On bringing the gold, they were given a copper token to hang around their neck. A person without this token around his neck had his hands cut off to let them bleed until he died. Then the cruelty increased and thousands of locals were captured and forced into the mountains to dig each mountain from top to bottom several times. Those who extracted gold washing the sail would stand bent in the water all the time. It would break their back. At least 1/3 died of starvation and disease in these mines. Men were sent to work in distant mines, while the Spaniards put their women to farming. The Europeans forced the native men and women to work so hard that an entire generation of them became barren. First of all, they did not bear children, and if they were born, the mothers could not breastfeed them, as the ability to breastfeed the children had ended due to hunger and diseases. Columbus and his fellow Spaniards had come so low in search of gold that they did not give mothers time to look after their children. Thousands of children starved to death soon. Some mothers drowned their children out of helplessness because they couldn't see them dying so miserably. The husbands died in mines, wives in the fields, and children due to lack of milk. Thus soon, this magnificent and fertile land became devoid of human beings. On these Spanish invaders' atrocities, a writer who had the opportunity ready to go there after Columbus writes to have witnessed such barbarities that he trembled from head to foot while jotting them down. With time, the atrocities of the Europeans increased instead of decreasing. The Spaniards became so leisured that they disliked even walking on foot, so they used Native Americans as animals for their ride. They would ride on the back of the natives for fast traveling, or they would sit in a ride like a swing made of ropes. They would sit in and two natives would carry it back and forth. Some other slaves would shade with leaves and fan the Spanish invaders with the wings of waterfowls. The Spaniards' invaders, now their masters, had no value for the blood and honor of the Native Americans. They came as explorers but now had turned into cruel beasts. It was so cruel that some soldiers stripped the locals of their skins only to check the sharpness of their knives and swords. Then they would enjoy watching the death pains. It used to be a regular pastime for them. Once two Spanish soldiers, from two Native Americans, snatched their parrots and beheaded them just for fun. They decapitated two children only for their entertainment for minutes. This sad gruesome game of death was not only in Hispaniola but also on other islands of the West Indies. There too, people were dying of massacres, hunger, and diseases. In Cuba alone, 7,000 children died in 3 months. The Native Americans were seeing this treatment and were fed up with the ignominy, the massacres, and the bonded labor. They also tried to fight the Europeans but were defeated. They left their areas and started taking shelter in the mountains and forests. Spanish soldiers would chase them through the jungles with the dogs and shoot or capture them to release the ferocious dogs on them. The dogs would scratch their flesh to bones and kill them. When the locals could not resist this oppression and torture, they decided to use a fruit as a last resort. The name of this fruit in the local language was cassava. This fruit saved millions of Native Americans from Europeans. My friends, how did it happen? Native Americans also ate this fruit and distilled poison from some of its varieties. So the Native Americans began to extract poison from this fruit. They usually used this poison on their arrows to hunt animals. But this time they decided to use this poison on themselves. The Arawak people began to commit mass suicides with cassava poison. They used to poison even their babies so that Columbus and his associates could not perpetrate cruelty on them. But obviously, not all people could commit suicide, so many people escaped to other islands and saved their lives. Among them was Hatui, the leader of Hispaniola. He rescued some of his tribesmen and brought them to Cuba. He also had some gold. Arriving at the safe place, Hatui put the gold before them. He said, "It for we are being killed." He threw this gold into the river to save his people from the greed of the Spaniards. He thought it was goodbye and good riddance, but even this effort did not work. When the Spanish invaders came to Cuba, they found the Hatui tribe. The invaders killed more than half of this tribe. The rest were enslaved for taking bonded labor. While they did not shoot or enslave their leader Hatui, rather, in front of everyone, they tied him to a pile of dry wood and set it on fire. But before he died, Hatui uttered some words that would embarrass European clergy for centuries. It goes, when Hatui was being tied to a wooden stake, a priest asked him to feel Christ close to your heart to earn heaven for your soul instead of hell. Hatui replied, "If heaven is where Christians like you go, I'd rather like to go to hell." Thus countless were killed by the gold-lusty people. If anyone was responsible for all this carnage and destruction, it was the leader of these beasts, Columbus. He enslaved and killed 8 million people on this island alone. Yes, 8 million innocent people. After the death of these people, the island of Hispaniola, with a population of 8 million, had only 50,000 people left. When Spain learned of the cruelty of Columbus and his men, the Spanish government became angry. They recalled Columbus to Spain and imprisoned him in chains. He was also tried in court. Columbus was acquitted in court because there were no witnesses to testify against him. However, Spain revoked all of his privileges and fired him. Columbus's New World powers were also taken away. Even in the last days, Columbus believed that the islands he discovered were a part of Asia. He was still far from understanding that the land he had discovered was a continent unknown to the Old World. He is said to have had a diary with him until his last days. Columbus would take out the diary and look at it when the failure hurt him the most. He read the words of the diary over and over again to comfort himself. In those words, Columbus had written, "They should have made me the ruler of the land, but I am in shackles and no one is listening to me." When Columbus returned to Spain from his last voyage, he was not famous as the discoverer of the New World but rather a criminal. He became rich but he never had peace of mind. He died in Spain in 1506. His death was also similar to his life. Columbus was buried in Spain, then his body was taken to the Caribbean island of Hispaniola. But after a century, Columbus's body was brought back to Spain. Today, Columbus has great respect for discovering the New World, which we know as the American continent. But no one can change the reality. Columbus committed the massacre of millions in his quest for gold, and for this reason, many American countries do not celebrate Columbus Day. Rather, they commemorate the genocide of the Native Americans.